The rain had started as a soft drizzle, tapping gently against the windshield as Dr. David Miller guided his SUV along the winding mountain road. Beside him, his wife Caroline glanced nervously at the darkening sky, her hand resting lightly on the GPS screen. 15 more miles, she said, trying to sound reassuring. In the back seat, 9-year-old Ella was absorbed in her book, occasionally pointing out a deer or rabbit to her baby brother, little Luke, who giggled in his car seat, clutching a worn, stuffed lion. It was meant to be a quiet family getaway, 1 week of rest in a rented cabin, far from the noise of the city and hospital corridors. But as the storm rolled in, the mountains turned from serene to sinister. The gentle rain became a downpour, pounding the roof like drums of warning. Fog curled over the ridges, visibility shrank, and thunder growled overhead. David's hands tightened on the wheel as the tires hissed over the slick road. He spotted headlights ahead, a massive logging truck barreling toward them, faster than the conditions allowed. In a split second, everything unraveled. The truck swerved slightly, its driver unaware he had drifted too far left. David reacted on instinct, jerking the wheel right to avoid a collision. The SUV skidded on the wet asphalt, hydroplaning as Caroline screamed his name. The guardrail came into view, then vanished beneath them. For a breathless moment, they were airborne. Ella's book flew from her hands. Luke's stuffed lion tumbled in the air. The SUV crashed into the ravine below, rolling violently before coming to rest upside down in the mud and rain. Silence followed, a silence too complete, too final. Raindrops fell through broken glass. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood. A faint glimmer of life remained. A baby car seat, thrown 30 feet from the wreckage, miraculously intact. Inside it, little Luke lay motionless but alive, alone in the wilderness, unseen, vulnerable. As flames began to lick the edge of the twisted wreckage, the forest held its breath, until something stirred in the shadows. Deep in the mist-shrouded wilderness of the Blue Ridge Mountains, something moved through the underbrush with quiet purpose. His name had once been Max, a proud, well-trained German shepherd who served on the county's elite search and rescue team. For 5 years, Max had been a hero, credited with finding lost hikers, stranded campers, even avalanche survivors. But that was before the cave-in, before the screams on the radio fell silent, before his handler blamed him for a life they couldn't save. Budget cuts and heartbreak did the rest. One morning, Max was driven to the mountains and left behind. That was 8 months ago. Now, the dog who had once slept at the foot of his handler's bed lived like a shadow, scarred, lean, wild. Max had fought off coyotes, scavenged for food, and sheltered under rock outcroppings during lightning storms like the one sweeping the forest tonight. But though the wild had claimed much of him, something deeper, something unbroken remained. As the wind howled through the pines and rain needled the forest floor, Max's ears twitched. Then came the sound, a distant crash, metal twisting, glass shattering, followed by silence. His body tensed. That sound stirred something buried beneath months of survival instinct. It wasn't just noise, it was a cry for help. He rose from his shelter beneath a low ledge, muscles rippling beneath his matted coat. Rain soaked through to the skin, but Max barely noticed. His paws gripped slick moss as he descended into the valley, following a scent trail that rode the wind, gasoline, scorched metal, and something else. Blood, and a baby's scent, faint but unmistakable. Max had smelled it before, in happier days, when his handler would visit schools, letting children pet him, laugh with him. But this time, the scent came with something darker. Fear, stillness. Max's breath quickened, nostrils flaring as memories sharpened. His training was still there, hiding under months of silence. It wasn't a conscious choice. Something inside him simply turned on. With each step toward the wreckage, the wild dog faded and the rescue dog returned, driven not by orders but by instinct, by memory, and something more powerful than both: purpose. Max stood motionless at the edge of the ravine, his amber eyes fixed on the debris-strewn slope below. The twisted wreckage of the SUV was barely visible through the driving rain, its frame crumpled like a crushed can, smoke rising in thin, ominous streams. The metallic tang of gasoline filled the air, sharp and volatile. His ears swiveled, straining through the wind and thunder for any sign of movement, any breath of life. Then, there it was, a faint sound, almost imperceptible. Not from the mangled vehicle, but further down the hill, a whimper. He moved quickly, his powerful body gliding over rocks and brush, guided by scent and instinct. Amidst shattered glass, a tattered stuffed animal, and torn foliage, Max found it, a baby car seat, half buried in mud, still strapped with its tiny occupant. The infant's face was pale, lips tinged with blue, but his chest rose and fell in shallow, precious breaths. Blood trickled from a small cut on his forehead, glistening in the rain like a red thread unraveling life itself. Max lowered his head and nudged the child gently with his nose. No response. The cold had already begun to creep in. Then, a sudden whoosh behind him, followed by the unmistakable crackling roar of fire that he had ignited. For a split second, the wild part of him screamed, "Run!" But Max didn't move. Instead, he made a decision that would define him. Not as a stray, not as a forgotten dog, but as a guardian. He stepped forward, gripped the edge of the baby's blanket with his teeth, and tugged, careful, measured, precise. The fabric held. Slowly, he began to drag the car seat away from the growing inferno. Flames burst behind them, heat searing the air, lighting the night in violent orange. Each pull was a battle, against gravity, against the rain, against the panic rising in Max's chest. But he never stopped. This child was alive, and that meant he wasn't leaving. Not now. Not ever. Because in that moment, when life and death hung in the balance, Max wasn't just a dog. He was a lifeline, a warrior, a silent promise that someone still cared. The journey from the wreckage to safety wasn't measured in distance. It was measured in heartbeats, each one more fragile than the last. Max dragged the baby-laden car seat through mud, thorns, and tangled underbrush, his muscles trembling with exertion. Rain pelted them relentlessly, turning the slope into a river of slick earth and stone. But he never let go. The baby, still unconscious, still breathing, was all that mattered. Each step Max took was slow and deliberate, his jaws gripping the damp blanket with unwavering care. He slipped once, nearly lost his footing again, but righted himself. He had chosen this child, and nothing short of death would make him abandon him now. After nearly an hour of painstaking effort, Max reached the mouth of a narrow cave, hidden beneath a ledge he'd once used to escape mountain storms. Inside, it was dry, dark, and just large enough for the two of them. The scent of pine needles and old leaves filled the air, a familiar comfort in an unforgiving world. He pulled the car seat gently into the shelter's rear, away from the wind, then stepped back to assess. The baby, still motionless, let out a soft whimper. It was a sound Max had heard before in disaster zones, a sound that meant time was running out. Max lay beside the car seat, curling his body around it. His fur was wet and cold, but his warmth began to radiate into the infant's trembling frame. He licked the boy's cheek gently, as if to coax life back into him. When the baby didn't respond, Max stayed still, breathing slow, ears alert, protecting. His training was long behind him, but something deeper had awakened. Not command, not memory, something primal, a guardian's instinct. As hours turned to days, Max developed a routine. He left the cave only to gather water, carrying it back in a curved piece of bark he'd found, sloshing it gently beside the child's lips. He built a nest of pine and leaves for insulation. When the fever hit, Max pressed tighter against him, listening to every rasp of breath, every stir in the night. Outside, predators roamed. Inside, a forgotten hero stood watch. 3 days passed, and Max never left his post. Because love, even unspoken, doesn't need words to act. The sun had barely begun to rise on the third day when Max caught the scent, sharp, musky, and unmistakably predatory. It wasn't the bear he'd smelled the night before, passing through harmlessly in search of berries. This was something different, something hungry, a mountain lion. His body tensed as his ears pivoted toward the tree line beyond the cave. The wind carried the scent in uneven waves, but it was close, too close. Max looked at the baby beside him, still burning with fever, lips dry, skin pale. Luke had grown quiet, too quiet. Every maternal instinct Max had developed in the past 3 days screamed that he couldn't move the child now. He wouldn't survive another journey through the wilderness, but staying meant defending this cave, this fragile sanctuary, with his life. Then the underbrush stirred. The mountain lion emerged, sinewy and silent, its golden eyes fixed on the cave. It was easily 30 pounds heavier than Max, its muscles rippling with predatory confidence. Max stepped forward, placing himself between the cave and the threat. His hackles rose, lips curled back into a low growl. No bark, no warning, only the promise that if the predator wanted the child, it would have to go through him. For a moment, the two predators locked eyes, each measuring the other. Then, with terrifying speed, the mountain lion charged. Max met the attack head-on, dodging the initial pounce and lunging for the cat's flank. He sank his teeth into its leg, but the mountain lion twisted with brutal strength, slashing Max across the shoulder with a hooked claw. Blood sprayed against the cave's stone entrance. Max didn't retreat. He fought like something far greater than a dog. He fought like a father defending his own. The fight was savage. Teeth tore, claws raked, the forest echoed with snarls and yelps of pain. Max was wounded, deep gashes along his abdomen, a limp in his step, but he never gave ground. In a final desperate move, he leapt from a fallen log, catching the mountain lion's throat midair. His jaws clamped down as claws raked his belly. The predator collapsed, twitching, then lay still. Max stood over the fallen beast, blood matting his fur, breath ragged, barely alive, but victorious. Behind him, the baby was still safe, and that was all that mattered. By the afternoon of the third day, Max could barely stand. His once powerful frame now trembled under the weight of blood loss, pain, and exhaustion. Each breath came shallow and strained. The deep gashes across his side from the mountain lion's claws oozed slowly, and his belly was raw and swollen. But his eyes remained fixed on the fragile bundle lying in the car seat beside him. Baby Luke, flushed with fever and too weak to cry, was slipping deeper into silence. Max nudged him gently with his nose, no response. A cold dread clawed at his chest. The pup, as he had come to understand him, was fading, and Max, who had fought with everything he had left, now realized this was a battle he could not win alone. Outside the cave, the wind had shifted. Max sniffed the air, faint, barely there, but real, human scent. Voices. They were distant, scattered among the trees. Search teams. Max's ears perked, the instinct from his years as a rescue dog sparking to life. He turned toward the sound and forced himself up, limbs shaking, dragging himself out of the cave with agonizing effort. He paused, looking back at Luke. The pup couldn't be left alone for long, but he had to try. Every step was a struggle. Thorns snagged at his fur, rocks scraped at his wounds. But Max moved forward, guided by something stronger than pain, purpose. He reached a ridge about halfway between the cave and the voices and lifted his head to the sky and barked. It wasn't the full-throated sound it had once been, no longer the commanding bark of a working dog. It was hoarse, broken, raw, but it carried. Again, he barked, and again. Then silence. Max waited, ears tilted. Nothing. His heart sank. He barked again, a final burst of strength, then turned back, stumbling toward the cave. Back to the baby. Back to the reason he was still alive. As darkness fell, Max curled once more around Luke, his breath shallow, but his mind alert. He had tried. He had sent his signal. Now, all he could do was wait and hope that someone had heard the cry of a broken hero in the woods. Morning broke over the Blue Ridge Mountains in hues of pale gold and muted gray. A faint rustling echoed through the trees, followed by hurried footsteps. Search teams, finally within reach. Deep inside the cave, Max stirred, his eyes fluttering open with effort. Every breath was a labor, each movement a fight against pain. His body, once a symbol of strength, now lay battered, torn muscles, punctured skin, a fever burning through his blood. But the sound of human voices pulled him back from the edge. Then it happened. A man's voice, hoarse, trembling, calling. Max! That name. His name. Max lifted his head with immense difficulty and let out a weak bark, no more than a croak of sound, but enough. The underbrush parted moments later. Flashlights danced across the cave's rocky interior, and then the figures came. Two men, breathless, soaked with sweat and urgency. One of them, an older man with silver hair and a military posture, fell to his knees. "My God," he whispered, crawling toward the limp German shepherd and the child he guarded. "Max, you found him. You really found him." The other man, a medic, was already at the baby's side, assessing. "Severely dehydrated, fever's high, but vitals are holding," he said quickly, motioning for a rescue stretcher. The child would survive. But Max was different. As they began lifting Luke from the car seat, Max let out a low whimper, not from pain, but from panic. He tried to stand, to follow, but his legs buckled. William, the grandfather, knelt beside him. "It's okay, boy," he said softly, resting a weathered hand on Max's head. "You did it. He's safe now. You can rest." Max's body trembled, eyes never leaving the child now cradled in the arms of safety. With the last of his strength, he wagged his tail just once and laid his head down on the stone floor. He had held on long enough. As the rescue team carried Luke toward the waiting helicopter, another stretcher was prepared for Max. Bloodied, broken, but honored, he was not left behind. Because heroes, true heroes, deserve to come home too, even if it costs them everything. The spring air in Tennessee was warm and gentle the day William Green carried his grandson to the top of the small hill behind their home. In his arms, little Luke clutched a new stuffed lion, identical to the one lost in the crash, though nothing could truly replace the old one. William moved slowly, not because of age, but out of reverence. In his other hand, he carried a small wooden box, simple, dignified, the final resting place of the dog who had saved Luke's life. They reached the shaded clearing overlooking the pond, where ducks drifted lazily under the willow branches. Beneath a newly planted dogwood tree stood a granite marker etched with just a few words: Max, faithful beyond measure. William lowered himself onto the bench he had placed there weeks ago, letting Luke sit on his lap. The toddler's gaze drifted to the marker, then to the soft earth where Max had been buried, along with Luke's recovered car seat and the singed remains of his old toy lion. The boy reached for the ground with curious fingers, not yet able to grasp the meaning of what this place truly was. "This is Max's spot," William said gently, his voice thick but steady. "He brought you home, kiddo. He gave everything so you'd have a future." Luke didn't respond with words. He couldn't yet, but he leaned into his grandfather's chest, resting quietly, as if somehow understanding the weight of the moment. News of Max's sacrifice had spread quickly, capturing national attention. Letters poured in from strangers, children sent drawings, rescue teams asked to name new dogs after him. William declined interviews and book offers, but he said yes to one thing: a new program, launched in Max's name, Max's Heroes, to train rescue dogs for mountain operations. Weeks passed, seasons shifted. Luke grew stronger, smiled more often, and returned to laughter. But whenever they visited Max's resting place, a calm came over him, as though the bond between boy and dog hadn't ended, only changed. Max was gone, yes, but his story lived on in the life he saved, the program he inspired, and in the quiet whispers of wind through the dogwood leaves, reminding all who pass that love, loyalty, and courage never truly die. In the quiet aftermath of tragedy, what lingers is not only sorrow, but the legacy of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. Max, a dog once discarded and forgotten, showed us that even in the face of abandonment and pain, the instinct to protect and love can rise above all. He did not understand the weight of heroism, nor did he seek recognition. What he did understand was that a life, fragile, innocent, and in need, was worth saving, no matter the cost. Max's story is more than an extraordinary rescue. It is a profound reminder that animals are not just companions or tools. They are sentient beings, capable of devotion, courage, and empathy that often surpasses our own. His actions bridge the unspoken bond between human and animal, proving that love knows no species, and loyalty doesn't require language. In a world where animals are too often abandoned, mistreated, or overlooked, Max's sacrifice urges us to reflect. How do we treat the creatures who share our world? Do we see their worth only when they serve us? Or do we recognize their innate value, their ability to feel, to fear, and to love? Let Max's legacy challenge us to do better, to open our hearts, our homes, and our voices for those who cannot speak for themselves. Love an animal, protect them, rescue if you can, and always honor the silent guardians who walk beside us, not for reward, but simply because it's who they are. Max gave everything for a child he once played with, then found again. May we never forget what he taught us, that the purest acts of love often come on four legs, and their paw prints stay with us forever.